you're going to get stressed out, you're going to get anxious.
For example, we see in road rage.
It's okay for us to feel negative sometimes. There are 4 things that we need to do.
I think this is one of the best practices out there.
The Buddha never spoke a lot about that. There's a Zen story, and that horse in that Zen story is your mind.
Good evening, Lama Yeshe.
Good evening.
Today's session is about thoughts, and I believe we have a lot of them. All these new thoughts, they generate a new worm in your head. How do we see them? How thoughts are just thoughts? That's what we are going to discuss today. So over to you, Lamaji.
So let me just, the science side of it first of all. So a thought is just a short-lived process of the brain. And even now with the leaps and bounds in neuroscience, they're still not sure how a thought comes. It's a bit like consciousness. We still not managed to get to the root of it. And of course, thoughts are stimulated either by something outside or inside. This we know. And we also know that, first of all, there's some sort of mental process goes on in an unconscious process goes on before we have a conscious thought. And from that thought, we then have action. So the thought and the action, fine, we can understand that. But the unconscious process working behind the scenes, that's what we're not sure about. So, and actually Buddha never spoke a lot about that. He just spoke about how if we don't, start bringing awareness to our thoughts, then they're going to lead us down the wrong road. So thoughts influence our action. So first we think and then we act. We never act without thinking. Now maybe it's an unconscious or a subconscious thought, but there will be a thought before we do the action. So thoughts are not all bad. Of course they're not. I mean, because they're a mental process that allows us to make sense of the world. It allows us also to communicate and to experience feelings and emotions. The problem is that we just follow them. So that's where we get now to the title, that a thought is just a thought. If you can keep that in your mind, if you can understand that a thought is just a thought, then it's not going to drag you into the wrong direction. So what we mean by a thought is just a thought. A thought is just because you're having a thought, it doesn't make it necessarily true, what you're thinking. It's not necessarily helpful, the thought. It's not a fact. It's a thought. It's not a fact. And it's also not you. We have 60,000 average, 60,000 thoughts a day. So we can't just pick one of those thoughts and say, yeah, that thought is me. Because, we have 60,000 each day. So we shouldn't identify with thoughts. So this is the first key thing we really need to think about. That those thoughts are not necessarily true. They're not a fact. They're just a thought. They're not necessarily helpful. And most definitely, they're not you. So don't identify with the thoughts. If you can keep that in the forefront of your mind, then those thoughts are not going to take you down the wrong path. It's when we blindly follow every thought, which we do, we tend to, and particularly the negative thoughts. Now, I've said before in this series about thought coming and about the mind being wired for survival. So that's its default mode. So if the mind is wired for survival and there's an unconscious process going on in the background before we even get to the thought, then it follows that a lot of our thoughts stem from that wish to survive, meaning they're going to be negative. It's so much easier for us to be negative, and we have to try harder to be positive. But if we identify with those thoughts, and if we believe and blindly follow each and every thought, it is going to take you down the wrong path. You're going to get stressed out, you're going to get anxious, you're going to tell yourself all sorts of stories about this is happening and that is happening, or we get ourselves so confused. And that's because we're not bringing awareness to our thoughts. We're not checking our thoughts. We're just allowing those thoughts to lead us. There's a Zen story, and there's a man standing on the side of the road, and this big white horse comes galloping down the road really fast, and there's a man holding on to the mane of the horse, just really trying to hold on. And as he goes by, the man says to the guy on the horse, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I don't know. The horse is taking me." And that horse in that Zen story is your mind. And you are desperately hanging on, holding on, just being driven by your thoughts. So it's important, if you take anything away from this session, the important thing to take away is that those thoughts are not you. It's a process of your mind. You don't know what brought up that process, but it doesn't mean that it's you or true or a fact or even helpful. Take that away. Also take away the fact that don't blindly follow each and every thought. So if you've got these repetitive thoughts going on in your mind, and the thought keeps coming back time after time after time, then it's time for you to face up to that thought. Yeah. So if you don't face up to a thought, it's going to keep coming back, because if that thought is getting stuck in your mind, and psychologists call it like a sticky mind, where the thoughts are just trapped there and they're just repetitive, keep coming back, the same thought time and time and time again. So if that happens, you need to look at that thought, because that thought is coming for a reason. So when we get repetitive thoughts, it's probably because we've not dealt with it, or because something has upset us and we haven't dealt with that. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, we haven't dealt with it and we need to deal with it. So there are 4 things that we need to do. The first thing is, before we try to face up to that repetitive thinking, is to calm ourselves down. Because until our mind is calm, it's impossible for us to actually look at anything, whether it be a thought or an emotion or a feeling. So we need to calm ourselves down. And a good way of doing it with the thoughts is to do a breathing practice and mentally recite, "Let go." So as you just sit there quietly, close your eyes. As you breathe in, just mentally say to yourself, "Let." And then as you breathe out, mentally recite, "Go." And just feel yourself relaxing each time you exhale. When it's like, go, you let it go. And you breathe in, let. Out, go. In, let. Out, go. And do that for a few minutes. It is going to calm you down. When we're calm, the mind opens up and we're more likely to be able to face up to whatever that thought is trying to teach us. Once we're calm, we need to then acknowledge that thought. A lot of the time these thoughts keep coming back because we're not acknowledging them. They want to be acknowledged. So acknowledge them. And you can even label them at that point, like a positive thought or a negative thought or an unhelpful thought or whatever. But we need to acknowledge When you start to acknowledge a thought, a feeling, or an emotion, then it already starts to lose its power. The fourth thing is then accept. Accept that at the moment I have this negative thought process. And when we accept it, we can say to ourselves, and that is okay. I have a negative thought process at the moment, and that's okay. Because it is okay. It's okay for us to feel negative sometimes. It's okay for us to feel pessimistic sometimes. If we just try to keep fighting them, we are going to make matters worse. So we calm ourselves down by let go. We acknowledge, maybe even label if you want, but you acknowledge that, yeah, I can see you, that thought process, I know you're there. And then we accept. And accept that at the moment, this thought process is here. If we don't accept it, what we're going to do is fight it. And once we've accepted it, now we need to face it and look at it and just think, okay, what is this thought process? What is it trying to tell me? What do I need to do to let this thought go? So it could be that somebody a few days ago said something to you or did something to you. And you've just been carrying that around. You never dealt with it. You never said anything to them. So that could be the reason that the thought is coming up. So when you're calm, you acknowledge and you accept, you face up to the thought and just observe it, see what is happening. Why does this thought keep coming? What do I need to do with it? That is how we can let go of repetitive thinking, is by facing up to them.
Can it be a part of storage consciousness as well?
What the thought? Well, you see, that's what I'm saying to you, is that nobody is aware yet of what that unconscious process that's going on in the background. So, yes, I believe it probably could come from that. It could come from your subconscious. It could come from your sixth senses. So, yeah, it will either be something outside of you or something within you that has stimulated the thought process, most definitely. But when you've got repetitive thinking, it means that there's something is going on. So then that's what we need to be looking at. What is going on there? So the key things, a thought is just a thought. And a thought comes to go, and it does. It's a process. So if we allow it, the thought will go and another thought will come along. Remember, there's 60,000 of them queuing up ready to pop into our head. So when we let certain thoughts go, it's not like we've got to sit there for a while and wait for another one to come along. Another one will come along straight away. So we can allow thoughts to go, but we need to bring awareness to our thought process. If you find yourself, thinking negatively or judgmentally or criticizing, anything like that, you need to bring awareness to that. Why am I thinking this way?
Lama Yeshe, when we are talking about these thoughts are one thing. Then the way people reflect, for example, we see in road rage, or for example, we see so many, even in office places, that people sometimes they just don't think and they just reflect. Do you think these actions, which happens immediately, whether negative or resulting in physical violence, what are the reasons behind this? Are these thoughts, or this is something related to the nature?
Yeah, well, it ties in with that eighth consciousness and our patterns of behavior. So, if the first time somebody cuts you up and you drive along and maybe you just say a few harsh words sitting
Yeah,
with
that
yourself
happens
in
a
the
lot in
car.
the capital.
Yeah, it happens in Chandigarh as well. And
Interesting.
so that's the first time. But then the next time you get a little bit more heated up. And then the next time and the next time, then it becomes a pattern of behavior. So that's because it's stored in that eighth consciousness. So A thought can trigger, of course, a thought can trigger your behavioral patterns from the eighth consciousness. But also, the behavioral patterns can also trigger thoughts. So, the brain is like that. A thought can bring up an emotion, which can bring up a feeling, but a feeling can bring up emotion, which can bring up a thought, or an emotion can bring up a thought and a feeling. So they're all intertwined in that way. So I would say that, people who do road rage is because they've done it, several times, and it's become a pattern of behavior. And, they don't stop and look at that behavior, or even maybe at the time they're too angry. But later on, they should reflect, was that worth it? And who benefited from me getting angry and shouting and blowing my horn and, things like that? So, like I say, we need to bring awareness. We need to bring awareness to our thought process, because if we don't bring awareness to it, we are just going to continue blindly following it.
I guess I have talked so many times about the reflection practice. I think this is one of the best practices out there. Like whenever you are going to your bed, spend 10 minutes thinking about your day, things you have done, the thoughts you had, the moment you just acted without involvement or any with your conscious mind, and just reflect that how could you change that. Maybe you will have them again. So do you want to act in the same way, or do you want to change it? So reflection practice is some of the, one of the best practice one can have.
Yeah, and it's a simple practice as well. Meditation takes a little bit of skill and time, but
Because
with
our mind
reflection,
likes to think. That's why it is one of the best practice, I believe, and easy to do.
yeah, but we need to control that thinking. Don't just, sit down and think about, one incident that happened, and then the next minute your mind has gone off and you're sort of thinking about the last time you was on the beach in Goa or something like that. So, you really, you have to control the thinking. Don't just let it control you. But yeah, the reflection practice is wonderful.
Watch your thoughts. These four practices: calm, then breathing practices, let go, label it if you want, and then just accept your thoughts. This can be the takeaway from today's episode. And until next time, thank you everybody. Thank you for joining.
Okay, namaste. Thank you.